little over 2 weeks we'll know the worst of it, but in the meantime there's likely to be considerable speculation and a few well-inspired leaks as to the contents of Michael Noonan's budget. Overall, he's looking to save €3.8 billion. Now, it's already been well signalled that the Department of Social Protection will see a significant cut in its budget, and several reports have suggested that child benefit is likely to be among the main targets. With us in studio is Senator Jillian van Turnhout, outgoing Chief Executive of the Children's Rights Alliance, and on the phone is Labour TD Aodhán ó Ríordáin. Jillian van Turnhout, let's start with you. A further cut in child benefit of at least €10 a month is what's being reported. Is that something you could support?
I totally could not support it. It would be the third successive cut for families. In Budget 2010 we saw a €16 cut with some compensatory measures for those on low income. In Budget 2011 we saw a €10 cut for the first and second child and a €20 cut for the third child. So we're talking about a further cut, which I really hope that it's some sort of kite flying that we can take down, because this is incredible stress for families. We know the child poverty figures are going to increase. We just don't know how much they're going to increase. But the likelihood is that this cut will further either deepen families who are already in poverty or push families on low middle incomes into poverty.
You know, though, that people in government in particular will be saying, well, if not here, where? Where should the cuts be?
Yeah, and we have to make some difficult decisions on cuts, and I've been quite vocal. I do think there are areas, and I know last week we had about the students' fees, and I know that's quite an emotive issue, but I do think we have to look right across the board. But we have to say child poverty is unacceptable. And for me, child benefit has been proven as a universal measure to ensure that families have a safety net. And this, I think very often we think, oh, well, this is just for families. But these families are at a very important stage of their cycle in life. They've got young children. You've much more increased costs as a family. So as a state, we should be giving payments towards families to encourage people to have children, because actually, later on in life, those very same children will pay your pension, my pension, and they contribute to it. So whether you have children or not, child benefit is merit good. It's something that's good for society. And it's obviously good morally also for all of us to have healthy and educated children.
On the moral question, though, it remains a fact that there are people who are receiving child benefit at the moment, families receiving child benefit, and to be blunt about it, they don't need the money.
Yes, and that's often the case, but I think we may be surprised by some of the families that do need it. On Friday in the Oireachtas, the Joint Committee on Health and Children had a hearing on child poverty, and we had the End Child Poverty Coalition and Social Justice Ireland in to talk to us. But one of my colleagues, Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick, talked about being out on the doorsteps canvassing during the election and how surprised he was at some of the areas where he found real and true poverty, in areas right around the country that we would not expect to see families struggling. So I think we very often think it's certain designated areas in urban areas in the cities. It is not. The fact is that families are really struggling at the moment. For me, it's an extremely stressful time. So even this idea that there could be a third successive cut to child benefit is totally unacceptable.
Aodhán ó Ríordáin, to bring you in on this, according to a government source quoted in the Irish Times this morning, a cut in child benefit is listed as one of the main options for possible inclusion in the final budget package. It sounds as though it's going to happen.
Yeah, reports like that make people like me feel very uncomfortable, because it is a family payment, and we've been had lots of pre-budget submissions from very many agencies, and I was at one from Bernardo's last week. We're talking about an extra 40,000 children who could be in consistent poverty by the end of next year. I mean, these are very stark times and very difficult choices. I mean, I think what we need to look at is the totality of the budget when it is presented to us. There was a report yesterday in the Sunday Business Post about a potential rebalancing of the universal social charge, which has hurt very many low-income families as well. So there has to be a counterbalancing.
Right, it sounds to me as though you're saying that this could go ahead, but once there were some sort of compensatory measures, that might be okay.
Well, it's never going to be okay. These are always going to be very difficult times, not just for people in the Oireachtas, for those who are in receipt of the payments. I mean, they're the ones that we are most focused on. But I mean, in all the measures that we take at budget time, there has to be a level of poverty proofing, so that we don't push families over the edge. There are other payments to go to families, the back to school clothing and footwear allowance. I think that needs to be tightened up as well. I had a parliamentary question down a number of weeks ago which showed that we paid €7.96 million given this year to families with 2 and 3 year olds who don't actually go back to school. So an awful lot of the payments that go through the Department of Social Protection, there's about 6 of them in all, a lot of them need to be tightened up.
Okay, but looking at your party's policy document from the election, just 9 months ago, cutting child benefit, it says, will create poverty traps, work disincentives and will substantially increase the already high number of children in poverty. Is that still your view?
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely our view that any payment made to families, just like child benefit, I mean, just like social welfare payments that we're trying to protect as well, have a huge effect on low-income families. We absolutely believe that. But if Labour weren't in government, we wouldn't be looking at an either-or situation here. Cutting child benefit or a cut in the basic rate of social welfare. We'd be looking at both. And, this the sort of thing that we're trying to protect against. Okay,
so a cut in child benefit is the lesser of two evils.
Well, it could come down to that. Nobody ever said that being in government would be easy, and nobody ever said that these times wouldn't be tough. And before the election, we all said these times would be painful. But we have tried in our period in government in protecting the lower paid through JLCs, to those on the minimum wage, to co-park agreement, and those the lowest paid public sector workers. We have been fighting battles tooth and nail every day to make sure the most vulnerable in society are protected.
Is it fair to say then that you're resigned to this?
Well, we don't know. I haven't seen the budget yet. But I mean, the point I'm making here is that nobody should allow such a report to be made in the newspaper without having some serious commentary about it. Let's look at the totality of the budget. Let's look at the rebalancing of the universal social charge, which is also being mooted. Let's look at the other poverty-proofing measures that we need to see in the budget, and to take all the measures in the budget as a whole.
All right, Jillian van Turnhout, I'm getting the sense that you don't agree.
No, I don't agree, because I think actually just a cut to child benefit, and I know it comes up each year. In fact, in preparing for this morning, I went back to a paper of April 2009 that the Children's Rights Alliance prepared, and the arguments are still the same. And we haven't used the opportunity to maybe look at how we do things differently. We're still talking about a blunt instrument of a cut, which actually cuts high-income families in exactly the same way as low-income families, so it's disproportionate. It doesn't make sense. If you want to get at people who are on higher incomes, use the income tax system. Perhaps we should be looking at putting and directing money into services, into supports that will directly benefit children, that will sort of address some of the arguments that are put forward. But just using a blunt instrument like a cut is deeply unjust.
So you're saying absolutely no cut in any circumstances in any of the child benefit rates?
If there is nothing to counterbalance it, whether it's putting money directly into services or it's to ensure not just those on I think we're looking sometimes very often at those who are in receipt of social welfare payments, but we also need to look at those low middle class families who are really struggling at the moment. The child benefit is the only solid income coming into their households. They're not receiving other payments from social protection. So we need to be careful in how we use this instrument of cuts. We need to be much more imaginative and look at what are we trying to do, what are we trying to achieve, and then take the action. We've been discussing this for several years now.
One final question to you, Aodhán or Ríordáin. The Irish Independent reporting this morning that a cut in the dole hasn't been entirely ruled out. They're talking about a figure of maybe an €8 a week cut in social welfare rates. Does this surprise you?
I'm not surprised these pressures are coming on government, but I mean these are the battles that we have to fight. Just in relation to taxing child benefit, which is one of the alternatives for families who don't need it. I mean that is something that I think has to happen long term. But the Department of Social Welfare say that they're unable to do that in the short term. But I mean those sort of excuses won't wash in the long term. But discussions of cuts in social welfare versus child benefits are very, very difficult things for people.
Would you oppose a cut in social welfare?
Well, we've been opposing cuts in social welfare from the day we got in the government.
Right, so you're saying, are you, that this isn't likely to happen?
Well, I'm not at the cabinet table, but I know people who are, and I know their opinion on it, and I know they're very, very opposed to any cut in the basic rate of social welfare.
Aodhán Ríordáin of the Labour Party and Senator Jillian van Turnhout, outgoing Chief Executive of the Children's Rights Alliance. Thank you both for joining us on